So Paul actually starts off by saying, we see. We do see. So think of the miracle of that part of the sentence. We can miss that. He's talking about actually seeing, at least in part, our Creator. And we're already sort of we're on the road to that connection. The God who created the whole universe is someone that we can all, at least in part, see right now. So there's so much that we can do with that. There's plenty that we can do with that in our own lives that we don't have to wait till we get to the other side for. Even a glimpse of that is so miraculous and powerful. We can find ways to cultivate that more in our own lives, and the transformative power of that will carry us through our lifetime. So the God of creation, who not only made us but the entire universe, the fact that we do see him at all is not only a miracle, but it is a starting point on the road to eternity. For that reason, we shouldn't get too hung up right now on the fact that our vision isn't crystal clear yet. That would be like jumping off the train between stations. Okay? Which I wouldn't want to do. If you've ever been on a subway, like that's the last thing you'd want. We must remember that Paul also talks about how he truly feels that in the future, he will know how God truly is as he is known. So Paul says, I will know as I am known. Okay? And again, I think a lot of the times this is spoken about just focusing on all the other stuff. Well, we don't know yet. We forget I think if we were in the room with Paul, he'd be slowing down at that part and saying, as I am known. Like, wow, let's think about that. There's something about the concept of being known by God. And I don't mean us collectively. I mean each and every one of us, you in your own individual life and experience. Okay? There's something about being seen and known that's so sort of touching, deeply touching, can be if we contemplate it. It comes across that the writer of Corinthians finds a sense of reassurance in his awareness that he is known by God, and a sense of longing on the speaker's part to know God just as God knows him. Wow. This, I think, gives us hope, because it shows us that we really are fully known by God, and even as a limited creative being, we intuitively seek to know God more completely. Wow, is that possible? So, as you may or may not have noticed, with the quotation from 1 Corinthians 13, I left out a verse. I deliberately did that, okay, in case you were thinking, another bulletin issue. She left out verse 11. No, Christine did that on purpose, because I wanted to have the opportunity to unpack that with you a little bit. Often when I've heard this quote given, I feel as though it's also been taken out of context or overemphasized a little bit. So verse 11, the part that comes in between, sort of the sandwich verse, is, when I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put away the things of childhood behind me. All right? Now, in other messages I've heard, I've felt this verse often interpreted as teaching us that we have to work more at becoming mature. There I am being childish again. I've got to work at putting that away. Now, I'm not trying to ridicule that. Sometimes we feel a conviction in our spirit that maybe we acted a little less than adults with people. That's a different conversation right now, though, okay? I believe that interpretation is out of context of this verse, though, for this particular passage. I believe that you have to consider this verse in the context of the other verses around it, which are saying that gaining an awareness of God as he truly is the focus, and that the awareness can become more accurate. Okay? I believe the context is that we have a lot of misconceptions about God's nature, and that we can develop a more accurate and mature understanding of God. Just as an adult, by the very nature of having more life experience and usually education, okay, in this day. Some people don't really have quality schooling around them, but for the most part, adults are more educated than children. And I think plain and simple, that's really what Paul is trying to emphasize here. Just a greater level of knowledge, not, oh, I'm so immature and I need to work at being more adult, okay? That's my take on it. So an adult gains more knowledge over time than that same person had in their childhood. And we have misconceptions about God's nature that we can begin to put behind us in the same way an adult might abandon the reasoning that they used with their younger mind to interpret the world. The adult has a new understanding now, so would have no reason to go back to the logic of their younger days, right? You think of the myths and things you believed in the Easter Bunny, and that was fun and everything, but nobody wants to go back to that, right? So I think that that's really the point here, is that as our brain develops, so can our conception of God. So I don't really think this verse is about working on maturity in the sense of behavior, but it really has more to do with accepting the fact that our perception of God's nature is underdeveloped, and that a new mind about who God is needs and can, okay? That's the hopeful part here. Replace that perception. You may also remember that the last time I was here, I talked about the prayer process as articulated by Matthew Kelly in his book, I Heard God Laugh, all right? And I wanted to conclude today's message by sharing an excerpt of that book with you. Why? Because it deals so specifically with each person's concept of God, which is really what we're talking about here, all right? Getting closer to an accurate concept or personal image of God, and how the effect of it can be on each individual's life. The book also provides some concrete advice that we can each begin to implement today if we want to help us see God through a clearer, lighter pane of glass. All right, so I'm going to jump around a little bit here, but starting on the section that says, what is your image of God? Few things will impact our experience of prayer more than the image of God we hold in our hearts. The difficulty is we each have an incomplete and distorted image of God. And that's what we've been talking about, right? Okay, that glass that we see through dimly. The scriptures teach us that we were created in the image of God, but without authentic experiences of God, the danger is that we begin to create God in our image. Or maybe your parents, or your Sunday school experiences, or if you didn't go to church, maybe your other experiences in life created an image that you kind of downloaded. You're walking around with that now, okay? And it may not be helping you. It may not be serving to you or accurate at all, right? Or only maybe in part. So through the habit of daily prayer and other spiritual practices, our image of God can gradually become more aligned with the reality of who God is. What is your image of God? Think about that for a second. Personalize it, right? I'm all about, if you can't personalize this, I don't know why we're doing it. That's really my take on things. And I have 2 master's degrees, right? I have a lot of education. I love philosophy and theology and ideology. But honestly, people, if we can't personalize it, if it's not going to touch us individually, it's just mental gymnastics. So let's, bring this into your personal life, your personal heart, your inner sort of sanctuary, okay? So what is your image of God? How do you envision God? Do you imagine God to be a loving father or a wrathful father? Do you see Jesus as a teacher, brother, friend, and savior? Do you envision the Holy Spirit as close and personal or distant and impersonal? We assume we know God. We also assume that what we believe about God is true, and often it is not. The only thing worse than not knowing God is knowing and believing things about God that aren't true. Throughout our lives, we've been told things and had experiences that distorted that image. For example, if your father or anyone in your life, okay, we can extend this to other authority figures, mother, older sibling, teacher, Because, we project all of those onto God, or, spouses, dating relationships, what have you. We do project our personal relationships onto God a lot, because that's the wounding, it's the brokenness that we sometimes carry into our prayer life, right? And we're projecting these human sort of issues onto our Creator. So if you've had a father that was abusive or neglectful, for example, then almost certainly impacted the way you see God. It will particularly affect your ability to see God as a loving and attentive father who is interested in everything that happens in your life. Another example may be things you heard about God at school. You may have been told that God doesn't exist. I think we've all been told that by somebody, right? And have friends that believe that. Some teachers may have made fun of students who believe in God. Sometimes we are aware that these influences are affecting us, and sometimes we're not even aware of it. It takes years or decades to realize how certain people and events have impacted our image of God, positively or negatively. So what is your God really like? God has many attributes in reality. He is infinite, eternal, good, self-sufficient, ever-present, generous, holy, personal, gracious, loving, wise, mysterious, all-powerful, providential, righteous, just, transcendent, truthful, eternal, patient, free, immutable. That means unchangeable, okay? Approachable, peaceful, perfect, compassionate, beautiful, praiseworthy, faithful, all-knowing, graceful, merciful, attentive. I was a latchkey kid, Generation X. We're the ones that grew up in the 80s and 90s, and the latchkey generation where we open the door to an empty house, right? So this idea that God is an attentive parent, it's not judging parents in that situation, because there are factors behind it, but this idea of God as being an attentive parent for some of us that grew up like that is different. It's a different experience, right? Attentive, fascinating, and deeply interested in everyone and everything He has created. There are so many attributes that could be used to describe God, so it is important to remember what we are trying to accomplish. Our goal is not to gain a theological understanding of God. That's all the ideology, okay? Our goal is to discover how to best connect with God. So here's the practical advice that I promised you, the concrete stuff that you could use today if you want to, right? Whenever you want. Whenever you're praying and your mind is like a squirrel in a cage, this is really handy too, okay? He says, from time to time, I like to ask myself, what 3 attributes, so you could pick 3 that were on that list, or 3 that are meaningful to you, or something you read in the Bible. What 3 attributes help you most connect with God? And he says, these are the 3 I picked today: loving, patient, and faithful. At other times in my life, I have chosen other attributes. I'm going to skip down, and he says, why does this matter? There are many reasons, but to begin with, 3 are intensely practical. The first reason is that your image of God profoundly affects the image you hold of yourself. Your image of God impacts every relationship in your life, and nothing will impact your relationship with God more than how you imagine Him to be. So just closing the book now, I just want to encourage you, you can also sort of, in your prayer life, I talked about meditative, contemplative prayer. Another thing that you can do, rather than talking to God a lot about who He already is, because He knows, right, is almost sort of turn that into a chant or a meditation. Any meditation, whether it's Christian or not, a lot of times focuses on the breath. So sort of, connecting with your breath, with each breath, you can choose your 3 attributes and sort of chant them or repeat them. God who is faithful, God who is kind, God who is a caregiver, right? Again, if that word Father hangs you up, you can talk about, God my healer, God my companion, God my guardian. Okay, and sort of reconceptualize a little bit. And by repeating that again, it sets your level of expectation, quiets the heart, quiets the mind, and allows you to pray in a way that is much more personal and, again, brings us back to our Creator.